So we are here to take a good look at funding. It is one of my favorite topics. I would say not the favorite topic, but it is very close to my favorite topics. Um, the reasons behind of this favoriteness is that funding really pushes us as entrepreneurs uh, sometimes to our limits, and usually this topic helps us actually go beyond it. And I'm going to ask you a few times during this workshop to comment in the chat, because there's so many of us here that we can't really talk all the time and discuss. So first of all, I would like to share for you to share in the chat that um, all those whose first priority at this very moment is to get their first or second funding round together, um, write in the chat, either if it's first, just write first, and if it's the second funding round for you, write second. And the people whose first priority is not the funding round, just keep things quiet and don't write anything. So Markus wrote that it's his first priority. Is there anybody else who's currently having headaches and being the biggest headache being the funding? Anssi also, Caroline. All right. And especially the people whose first headache this is, or the priority number one headache this is at the moment, I encourage you to try to have this 1.5 hour workshop. It's going to be more of a lecture, but I'm going to ask you to do some tasks while I'm talking and while I'm doing things. And for anybody who wants to get the maximum out of this, definitely write notes. I'm going to share all the slides through Rashad to you. So when you take some notes and actually start the work already, you can get much more out of this workshop, because funding it's a bit of a pain in the ass topic. There's so much things to cover, and we can't do everything. We can't do everything in the first 90 minutes that we have here, but we can cover the practicalities of it. And that is the focus of this workshop. And now I would actually want to take or give yourself some reflection here. The last question in this slide, if you succeed, why would you be excited, is a question that entrepreneurs never actually get usually asked. And I want to ask that question from you. If you succeed in fundraising, why does it matter? Like, why would you be excited? The question is important, because if we don't really understand the reasons behind why the hell are we looking for funding, it is going to be very, very difficult. It's going to be difficult in any case. But if we have the reason behind that, we truly believe that I need 50,000 euros to get this and that done, it's going to help you keep yourself motivated throughout the 3 to 8 months of time that it actually takes to go through a fundraising round. So keep that in mind. Like, if you succeed, why would you care? Why would you actually be excited? All right, let's get things going. So my name is Oki. I'm currently advising startups at NewCo Helsinki. I've been with startups or in the startup world for the past 17 years. I've raised a few funding rounds myself. I've made a few investments myself, so I've kind of seen both sides of it. And I've been running co-working spaces and creating acceleration and incubation programs. So I know a thing here and there about startups. And funding, as I mentioned, I want to keep this practical. I've given you in this presentation all the necessary information about funding sources as links. So we're not going to go through many of the sources of funding themselves. I think you can find those especially with the links that I've provided, yourself too. We're going to talk more about the practical parts. So we'll have a break about halfway through, a bit earlier possibly. We're going to go through some terminology and basics, especially as I understood that there's many people who are first timers to this topic. And it's a bit cryptic. So bear with me and bear with yourself and give yourself time to really understand the terminology and things, because your first funding round, if you have never done it before, will happen in a state of mind where you feel like, I don't get it, I don't understand everything, and that's completely fine. During the second funding round, you'll be way better off, of course. And because of the complexity of these things, it's completely natural that the first funding round is a bit vague and you're still looking to understand the issues behind. We're going to take after that a look at the funding options, paths and rounds. What do all those mean? And I want to try to give you also the point of view from the angel investors so that you understand that who you're talking to, how they think, and why you should say what you say. Then after the break, we're going to actually take a look at how much money do you need and how to kind of calculate that, or at least get some structure behind it. We're also going to talk about the ask, and I'm not going to talk about pitching, but the ask, the idea behind it is that you actually have your business pitch, and after that you have your ask. So you ask an X amount of money, and we want to see how that is structured. Then we'll take a look at some common mistakes. There's too many common mistakes to really go through in even 1.5 hours, but maybe the most fundamental mistakes people do when fundraising. And then we're going to take a little bit of scratch to the funding options, which you can then continue yourself through the links. And then let's see how much discussion and questions there will be. So if you have a question at some point, write it in the chat. I'll try my best to follow it and then answer that question when there's an appropriate time for it. And from my perspective, if you feel like it, just unmute and say the question that you have, interrupt me. I would rather have a little bit more interaction than just me talking to the camera for 90 minutes, because to be honest, that is a bit awkward. So either through chat or just unmute. And what about now? Any questions, anybody? Is there any parts that you would want us to focus more on, or do you feel like if there's something missing, just comment and we can go through that too. If not, remember that you can throw the chat or unmute anytime and ask a question. So let's get things going. Because we're remote, there's no materials, there's nothing you can, workshop things on. So use an Excel, use your notebook, write on the wall, on the back of your hand, wherever. And again, just interrupt and ask a question if you feel like it. So let's get on to it. The terminology of funding is an interesting world. It's pretty static. So once you learn it, you can pretty much master it also from 5 years from now. We'll start with a few basic ones. Burn rate. A burn rate is the money your company or team uses in a month. You add all the expenses together, and your timeline is 1 month, and how much money you use in a month, that's your burn rate. It can be, of course, it changes a little bit, but you count the average, and usually a startup's burn rate is between 5,000 to 15,000 after they raise their first round, if they have a team of 1 to 3 people, for example. So we go in those kind of numbers. Runway. When a startup says that they have 10 months of runway, and let's say their burn rate is 15,000, that means that they have funding of 150,000 euros altogether at this moment. So they will burn through that 150,000 in 10 months because their burn rate was 15,000 per month, and thus their runway is 10 months. Sometimes angel investors ask, for example, so if I invest 100,000 in your startup, what will you get done? What will that money be used for? And how long is your runway? So it is pretty essential to understand this term. So we go to the VC, venture capital, which I call the greedy person. And it's not because that person necessarily is greedy, but the setup between how they make their money is basically based on, well, capitalism and greed. So their job is to maximize the money for the people who invested in their fund. So the venture capital fund must maximize their output, and they will have pretty harsh terms for the startup. But venture capitalists are more for later stage startups usually than very early stage startups. So that's not the focus of this discussion here. Business angel is more in the focus of our topic because we're talking about our first funding round or possibly second. Business angels, as in brackets is said here, possibly not so greedy person. So usually business angels have a more human point of view into their investments. They might not invest just based on the return of investment and how much money will they make, but there will be elements of, I actually care about this topic, thus I want to invest, or I believe that this team is actually going to make it, even if the business at this moment is not yet ready, but I will still want to invest. So there's a little bit more soft values usually on the business angel reasons why they invest. Then we're talking about valuation, pre-money and post-money. This means we'll start with post-money. If your post-money valuation is 400,000 euros and somebody invests 40,000 euros, this means that as the valuation is post-money, then they will buy 10% of your startup. So they will actually see that the valuation is 400,000, they invest 40,000, so they will get that 40,000 stake out of that 400,000. So 40,000 for the business angel and 360,000 stays with you if you are the full owner of the company. Pre-money is then that if the investment is pre-money valuation and 400,000 is the pre-money valuation, then after the funding round, the company's valuation is 440,000 euros, which means that the investor gets a little bit less in percentage compared to the post-money valuation. Usually, and in the beginning this might be a little bit confusing, usually companies talk about post-money valuation. It is more frequently used way to tell people what's the valuation of your company. Okay, the ask, we already actually talked about this a little bit. You at some point have to declare your ask, how much money you are looking for, what will you get done with that money, and that is what the ask is about. Funding round. Startups may state that we have a funding round open and we aim to close our funding round by the end of the year. And during that time, they want to get commitments from investors. And as they close their funding round, that's the moment when they usually have the money in their account and they have raised enough money, thus the funding round is closed. Then exit, a simple but important term. When a startup sells all their shares or their shares are bought by somebody, that is called an exit. And that is the moment when usually the business angels and other investors will get their return on investment. So somebody buys their shares from them, and most probably the investors are looking for something like 5 to 10 times their money back. So they hope that the valuation of their company has gone up, and at the exit, they get their return on investment. And then pivot. Everybody talks about pivoting. What it means is a pivot is a smaller or larger change in the business model of the company. And I'm going to talk about pivoting myself. So what I mean by that is that the startup understands that this current business model is not working as well as we hoped for. We need to look for something better. They change their business model a bit. It can be that they start targeting different customers, or that they try a different channel to reach those customers, or they change their product a bit, so that any of those can be a pivot. Okay. And remember, if there's anything unclear, please comment in the chat or just unmute and comment. We'll go to the basics. So terms and terminology, main things of them we've gone through. And now we go to more to the practical parts. And here I urge the people who are going through their first funding round to really start taking and having your attention, and write down some of your own thoughts and needs about your first funding round on paper. And it will help you structure things a lot more for your first funding round. So usually it takes about 3 to 8 months for a startup from the moment that they decide that I will look for funding to the moment that they get the investors' money to the account and they can close their funding round, or that they understand that, okay, there's nobody interested to invest enough, and we will not actually take any money at this point. So the funding round didn't go through. So 3 to 8 months, that's a long time. And the 50 times no describes the amount of no's that you will get from investors. So you will have to look and have many discussions with different types of investors to find the actual ones that will then invest in your case. And there's two sides to it. Usually, the first discussions that you go through with potential investors, they will have such tough questions that you don't have the answers to those questions, and you understand that, oh shit, I'm not really ready enough. I need a little bit more understanding about my business so that the investors trust me enough that they will actually invest. Or that it takes a long time for you to find the right investor. And by the right investor, I mean a person who is actually looking for the types of startups that you are working for. So there's these two sides. Usually, especially in Finland, funding rounds happen both with public and private money. So you kind of balance between looking for public sources and looking for private sources to then combine them in a way that you ultimately close your funding round. Business Finland's Tempo funding is a good example of this, and we'll actually talk a little bit about that later. So I mentioned about the 50 times no and about the 3 and 8 months of time that it takes, and this is actually hard work. It's a lot of learning, especially for the first funding round, and there's a lot of good stuff out there to help you on the theory side and a little bit on the practical sides. YouTube videos, there's the Y Combinator videos, startup grind videos. There's a lot of stuff out there so that you can get the basics together and start fundraising. Here's a few questions to guide you, and we'll start with a real nutcracker or brain killer question, which dictates a lot about, are you actually ready to fundraise or not? And the question is, why is your timing right? And I could talk about 2 hours about this topic, but try to keep it short. Your timing is too early if you cannot find any customers or early adopters. Your timing is too late if the market is so saturated that you have to compete with your competitors about potential customers, and thus the customer acquisition cost is high. So your business growth will cost a lot of money because you have to invest a lot of money into the customer acquisition. So your timing is right when you're somewhere in between these. The customer acquisition cost is pretty low because you can find early adopters who are already looking for solutions like yours. And they're actively happy to try different solutions to find a solution to their current problem. And to understand the timing, you actually need to do experiments. You actually need to do different kind of tests with landing pages or face-to-face interviews, or just trying to sell your solution to potential customers to understand about, is my timing right? And there's a saying that in the best cases, in best startup cases, it is the market that pulls the product out of the startup. And what that tries to tell us is that the market and the timing has to be such that the people who are going to be your customers are already looking for these kind of products or services, and they will ultimately tell you what they need and how it needs to be served to them and how much are they willing to pay. And that is how the market pulls the product out of the startup. So the timing is a big issue, and 90% of the potential questions that the investors are going to ask you is actually about the market and the timing. And through that angle, or from that angle, you will also answer the questions about your product and your team. So is your team able to actually understand the situation in the market and serve the market with the right kind of product so that there will be business? So the next thing I actually want to make you think is, which type of investors will give a rat's ass or care about your product and your team and your startup? So there's a lot of investors who are specialized in certain type of cases and products and markets. So you want to understand that which kind of investors are you looking for? Are they interested in fintech and their ticket size that they're happy to invest is 50,000, for example? That narrows down a lot of investors out, and it narrows down very heavily who you should be targeting. Okay. Then the next thing is, your network is your best tool at this point. You actually want to utilize your network as much as possible. And why is this? Because basically all investments are based on trust. And if somebody from your network can show you towards a potential business angel, then because there is this trusted person in between, making this bridge between you and the investor, there's a much more probabilities that this investor, first of all, will listen to you, will be interested in you, and possibly then think that would this be a good investment or not. Then to start with next, after utilizing your network, or thinking about it, how to do it, you actually want to list the people you want to talk to. So you can start in Excel, a Word, and then start just listing the people who actually you want to talk to. And that gives you your go-to list, which then you can start contacting. You have trained your pitch, you understand your ask, you created a good story, and you can just start telling this story to this list of people and see how they react and learn based on that. Okay. Basics continuing. One important thing is that, yep.
Sorry to disturb you. This is Jori from Kartoteca. Nice to see you here. I have a couple of questions. So the first one is related to the first topic about 8 months. So if startup didn't find any investment in 8 months, does it mean that the idea is bad and no one believe in it?
Well, a good question. If you, in those 8 months, have, for example, reached about 50 relevant investors and all of them has said no, and if there is a pattern in the answers that they've said no because, for example, the team is not experienced enough or the market doesn't seem to be ready for this kind of a product or there's too much competition, then I would start thinking about that, okay, out of 50 investors, 30 have said to me that the market is not big enough, that this company or this business model could actually become scalable, and thus I believe that it's not worth investing money in. Then I would think that maybe there's something to it. 30 professionals who see a lot of cases like this all tell me the same thing. Maybe this is not the case then. And that's when I would start considering really that maybe angel investment at this point with this current business model and with this ask that I have won't work together. So that's how I see it. Thanks, Jori, for the question.
Thank you for the reply. I have another question also.
Okay.
First time requires and the timing. So if we are offering some kind of service which is unique, there is not existing yet on the market, and you say that we should sell to the first customer. So would be 10 customer good amount of the customer for investor, or we should sales like hundreds?
That's a good question. What is the number of potential customers that, or potential or sales that then prove enough of market need and end user need? This actually is really related about the business model. So let's say that a company has only 5 potential customers anywhere in the world, and one customer brings them 1 million per year. Then, of course, one most probably is not enough for investors to prove that, okay, well, that they can make 1 million per year, so this could be actually a case to invest in. But if the profit and revenue out of one sales is very low, and if let's say even that it is not repeatable, so we're talking about mobile game sales, for example, then it becomes much more of a numbers game, and the startup needs to prove that X amount of our potential users have already bought, and it has cost us Y amount of money to reach these customers, and through that amount of customers we've gotten Z amount of revenue. That kind of mathematics builds trust towards the investors, because they can directly see that if I invest 50,000 euros in this case, they use 90% of that money in customer acquisition, they will most probably get this much customers, and that will bring them this much revenue. So it makes them way easier for the investor to count that, would this investment make sense to me or not? So it is really based on the business model. It's difficult to say exactly how much sales or how many customers is the perfect amount.
All right, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Okay, I think we need to go a little bit faster. I've been dilly-dallying a little bit, or actually a lot. So we'll accelerate a little bit. So accountability. Have one person from your team to take accountability of the fundraising. It rarely is a team effort, because one person needs to train the pitch and the ask and have the facts straight. So it's better if one person from the team takes the task. What that person needs to know is the domain. What's the startup from? Is it fintech? If it's fintech, they need to know and understand the market entry, the domain knowledge of the fintech industry, so that the investors understand that, okay, this dude really knows what she or he is talking about, so I trust him from that perspective. You need to also understand your own business. So if you can't answer truthfully and straightforwardly the investors' questions about your own business, they will feel a bit awkward and say that, okay, I can't trust you to know this well enough. That's pretty clear, but there's so many questions about it that the investors can ask you that it is actually a challenge to understand your own business well enough that investors will trust you. Also, the funding side, these things you need to understand so you will be credible towards the investors. It helps if you're a social person, an outgoing person. It helps if you already have an existing network of maybe investors or people who know investors. If you have project management skills, that's a big up. I don't, and my first funding round about 11 years ago was a bit of a pain in the ass, to be honest, because I couldn't manage myself well and go through the project with a good structure. Storytelling helps. If you're a good storyteller and you can build a good story, that definitely helps because we are human beings and stories really get us going. Negotiation skills is also something that you will train if you don't have them already. In the first funding rounds, it's not that big of a thing. It is important, but when we talk about venture capitalists, there's really some negotiation in play there. All right, so I want to help you understand a little bit, and the people who are raising funds or thinking about it, it helps to structure a little bit about the business case from the angel's perspective. So is it low risk, medium risk, or high risk? And with low risk, I mean that the business model is pretty well known. You can, for example, find out 10 competitors worldwide who are already running a successful business with that business model. That means that it is easy to copy, and somebody else has already proven that how it works. So the risk is pretty low. What you do is, or what is preferable to do, is that you bootstrap, which means that you use your current available money, let's say it's 500 euros, to build a landing page, start sales, and start seeing how much you can get customers and how it's possible to do it, to get metrics to build the business case and build credibility towards investors. Once, hopefully, you can copy the business model, copy their value propositions and marketing messages from successful operators all around the world, and you prove to yourself that, yeah, I can actually get customers with these strategies. You might go to a bank or Finveras or possibly your family to ask for a little bit of money, not much, but a little bit of money to accelerate your customer acquisition speed. So you invest money for direct growth, and you already know that if I invest 100 euros or 1,000 euros in this same marketing campaign, I will get 2,000 euros back. So the risk is low. Medium risk, so there's a little bit more uncertainties in either the market, or possibly you're uncertain that can I actually build such a product that ultimately will be a better product or solution for the end users, and thus they will choose mine over the competition. So there's a little bit of more risk, which means that you'll most probably have to have a little bit of more money in the account so that you can overcome these challenges, find a working business model, and then start making money. Usually it's about business angels. It might be about some pilots that you get money from in the early stages. So these kind of things we're looking at in the medium risk case. Then we come to the high risk, high reward type of case, where you have multiple uncertainties about the business model. You are, for example, building something for the first time in the world. Nobody else has ever done it. You say that I can do this and our team can do this, which of course from the angel perspective and investor perspective feels that, okay, it's great that you say that you can do it, but we have no proof that you can do it. And it looks like you will at least need 2 million euros to do it. So let's see how we can find a way to mitigate those risks. And from your perspective, how can you actually build trust towards the investors enough that they will build or invest in your case. Finnish Business Angel Network is one of the classic examples of people who look for these kind of cases. Business Finland funds these type of cases, and it's much more about early adopters and understanding early adopters in the market when we're talking about high-risk cases. So we'll just take a quick look about what types of funding rounds we have, who are the investors usually, what's the amount invested, and what kind of valuations are we talking about. Just take a quick look of this table. You most probably will spot yourself somewhere there, and if you're a first funding round looker, then it's between FFF, so friends, fools, and family round, to most probably seed round. Some of you might be looking at A round as the first one, but that really, it's usually what we call a seed round. That is your first real funding round, and the two brackets before that are usually funding rounds that make you ready to get your seed round. Seed round means in this case that you are already ready to invest in your growth, at least a little bit. You have validated the business model in such a way that the money you get will be used to validate your path toward growth. And A, B, and C round are usually funding rounds where your business model has been proven, and that money will be used mainly for growth. So pre-seed and FFF rounds are really finding out the working business model, testing that, finding what we call problem solution fit, so that your solution can actually provide a good enough solution for a problem, and thus that is the thing that we try to prove at that point. Valuation is a topic that raises a lot of questions. So one of the easy ways to think about your own valuation is to look for startups that have been similar as you during this year or last year. They have fundraised, they have had a certain valuation, they were able to close that round, and you can start comparing yourself and your company and team to that team when they raised their funding round, and see that, are we better or worse somehow? Should our valuation actually be higher or lower? So that can give you a lot of understanding of what should our valuation be. And of course, there might be no companies like you out there, and you cannot compare yourself to anybody. That's a bit more problematic. And then you have to look a little bit broader, that, okay, this kind of company at this market and this vertical were valued like this. So maybe we're a bit lower than that. Our team is not maybe that good, but we have a bit more validation from the market. So maybe we value ourselves a little bit lower than that competitor or indirect competitor. All right.
Can I ask one question?
Yeah, quickly, yes.
Okay, can I ask?
Yes, Jori, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. So about pre-seed and seed stages, if you are selling your shares to the first investor, business angel, what is the average percentage you should sell?
Depends. We're going to talk a little bit about that later, but I can go through that now. Usually companies don't sell, more than 25% in the first rounds. And the reason is that it's thought that after the third round, you should still own a majority of your shares as the founding team. Because if you lose control of the majority of shares too early, it is seen that is not good, and it is seen that you're losing too much of your shares, and that the founders are not anymore maybe focused enough, or they don't have enough interest to work for the best of that company because they don't own that much anymore. So my suggestion is that each funding round, it would be between 10 and 20% that you sell. This gives enough incentive for the investor to actually invest, and it means that you are not letting go of too many shares per funding round. So that is the approximate share amount that you should be letting go, or I think is appropriate of letting go for each funding round.
Okay, thank you.
A quick look from the angel investor perspective. What they want to do is pretty simple. They want to maximize their ownership, and thus they want to maximize their profit. They want to push the valuation down so that they get more. That is usually how they want to work. And how they do it is they want to state the valuation first, for example. They would tell that, okay, yeah, it's a good company. I think the valuation is 500,000. What do you think? And that's when you lose control of the conversation, especially if your thinking was that it's actually 1 million. And it's hard to actually, in that social situation, tell the angel that, no, it's not 500,000. We're talking about 1 million. And the business angel has a bit of leverage when he thinks that, well, I just told you that it's, from my perspective, like 500,000. 1 million is too much. So these kind of tactics are used by angels. So, and the key here is in your ask to state the valuation, that you are the one setting the bar, and then maybe we can talk a little bit lower, but not much. So, business angels usually decide based on the money, of course, and the business. They want to make money. That is their first priority usually, but there's a lot more softer things behind. So if they're very interested about the topic, let's say they are a doctor and in their childhood they have struggled with a certain type of disease, and your product is really about early finding and seeing early symptoms in 2-year-olds about that disease, and this might drive the angel to really invest in your case because personally it's a big thing for them. And a second thing is that it's a combination of two things. Does that angel investor see your team as coachable? This means that do you listen? Do you listen? That's the main question. And do you take their advice? Do you give value towards about their advice? And all these kind of interpersonal relationships, that can they actually provide value to the team other than this money? And all this actually relates to a biggest question of all, which is trust. No angel investor is ever going to invest in your team or you or your business if there's no trust. So all the interpersonal things, all the business related questions that you can answer, either good or not so good, will either drive trust or erode trust. And metrics on the business side is, of course, a proven neutral way of showing that we can deliver. By metrics here, I mean, for example, if you can show customers and early adopters that you can find 50 new early adopters per month, and you've kept that rate for 3 months, and there's even a little bit of growth in it, which proves that, okay, this team can actually deliver. And if I invest in this, it will only exponentially grow their potential in getting more customers. So metrics is very important here. Many investors will look just simply ways to say no to this case or your case. And it might be the team, the market, the product that they don't believe in, but you want to learn as much as possible if they say no. You want to ask them, why is it a no? Why don't you think that our team can make it? And if you find a pattern around that, every second investor tells that, nah, I don't think your team can make it, and you start understanding why, then you can actually make some changes, learn from those answers, make some changes, and then possibly even get back to them that, hey, we actually fixed the issue. So they invest. In the end, the investors will invest in you as a human being and mostly in the market. And the market here is very important, as we talked about the timing. So if the investor doesn't understand the market themselves, they will most probably feel very reluctant to actually invest in your case because they can't understand what's the risk involved. All right, we won't have a 10-minute break. We'll actually have a 2-minute break. So because we're a little bit behind schedule. So we'll have a 2-minute break and we'll be back 15:50 and then we'll continue. All right, that was a short break. Any questions at this point? I feel like we're going through things pretty thoroughly and at the same time still pretty quick. Any comments so far? Any questions? If not, then we will just keep steaming on.
Wait, sorry, short question.
Yeah.
What is the minimum amount basically business angels invest from 30K? Yeah.
Well, depends. I've met investors who invest with tickets as low as 5,000.
Into one investor or many investors into one startup?
One investor into one startup, 5,000. That is and of course there has been cases where kind of this friends, fools and family type of investors only invest 1,000. And then there's multiple people, let's say maybe 20 people investing a small amount. But usually, depending on the business model and depending on the funding needs, but usually the funding rounds in total are not smaller than 20, and even that is very rare. So it is mostly between 30 to 50,000 that are these kind of smaller funding rounds. And then if we're talking business angels, usually it's rare if business angels invest more than 200,000 in Finland. Some do. There's a few cases or a few people who do invest more, but usually it is less than that. If we take a look at markets outside of Finland, like in the US, it is not rare that a business angel invests 500,000. So the markets are very different. Okay, let's go on. So, how much money do I need is a question that is, of course, pretty difficult to answer. And we're going to take a look at it from a couple of perspectives. First of all, what I call the Excel exercise is when you start putting down the numbers. And at this point, as the last point says, that so-called traditional business metrics might not apply, is that you might not have all the metrics together that you would need to complete your business calculations, which means that you're going to have to assume a lot of things, you're going to have to guess. And in here, it's about credibility. Can you make a credible enough Excel exercise combined with a credible enough story around your startup that will create enough trust in the investors? And can you have enough of those metrics that we talked about before? Some proof from the market. Maybe it's existing competitors, or maybe it is your own tests and experiments in the market that have gotten you these type of metrics that will create trust towards the investors that, okay, this makes sense. The investors usually want to see some type of assumptions and expectations that you have. How big will this business become? How much customers can we acquire in a certain time frame? And what they want from this is a few things. The main thing is that they actually want to understand your level of what's the right word? Your level of ambition. So are you yourself thinking that, you know, this is going to be a small business and it'll be fun and nice and it'll be just me doing it? Or am I going to grow this into a worldwide scalable business that will create millions of revenue at some point? So this kind of level of ambition type of things is the number one thing they want to understand. And number two is they want to really understand that how does it actually work? And how are the customers going to be acquired? And how much revenue will it make per customer? And is the case going to be scalable, or can the growth happen fast? So these kind of more precise issues. And ultimately, based on the business model, the investor wants to understand that if I invest 100,000 now, could I predict that in 5 years I will get my money 10 times back? So is this type of growth going to push the valuation of the company so high that I will get money back with this ratio that I am looking for, let's say 10 times. Okay. One thing to remind you is that we as entrepreneurs are usually optimists. So our plans are not actually, they don't resemble reality. So if you think about it yourself and you want to give a more real sense of this Excel exercise, you should add with a factor of 2 to 3x to the timeline length. So if your current Excel is about a year and you will see this much growth in 1 year, the reality most probably will be that will be reached inside 2 or possibly 3 years. This is just based on a personal how much the startups I've seen and how many calculations I've seen and how they've actually ended up to be in reality. It's of course case by case basis. Then that's part A of how much money do you need. And then if you're looking to build a scalable startup where the risk level is medium or higher, and you know that this funding round that you close will not be enough to make your business grow and scale the way it needs to happen, so that you will need further funding rounds still. Then you need to understand that where do I need to be so that when I raise the next funding round, that I will have enough things together that I will be able to raise what I needed then. So in this case, we have a case of now you're looking for 80,000 euros, and with 80,000 euros, you're going to be able to push the business up to this point with this much customers and revenue. And then with those numbers, you then believe that I can raise the next 200,000 euros. And for that funding round, you will most probably need to understand that this 80,000 euros helps us create a proof of concept and get the first paying customers. If we get to that point, our competitors that have come previous to us or before us have been able to reach and raise the next funding round. So that is the kind of game you need to predict and play to understand that how should you create your funding strategy, at least for the following round also. Okay, then we talked about the ask a lot, and I feel that this topic doesn't or hasn't received enough light, or people haven't paid enough attention to this. So you have your business pitch, and in that business pitch you have your ask. And it is really good to have a clear ask, because that gives the investors the understanding of, okay, this person actually knows what they're looking for and what they're going to do with it. It's a clear plan that infuses trust. I want to talk to this person. That is what you actually want from your pitch. And the ask is the final thing where you clarify in a very short way that what do you want the people in the audience who are looking for these kind of things, please talk to me, or want to build a business like this, talk to me. That's what the ask is for. So you're looking for a certain amount of money. That money gives me a runway of 8 months. It will be used to create the first proof of concept. With that proof of concept, go to the market, get the first 100 paying customers, and at that point our revenue will be 5,000 euros MRR, so monthly recurring revenue, and we will recruit a marketing and sales team, 2 persons who will continue this work, and we believe at that point that our valuation will be 4 million euros for the following round. So this could be an ask that you state at the end of your pitch. It's clear, it tells you what the money will be used for, what that money will actually make happen, what it will ease to make happen, and then our fund valuation should be this in the end. The valuation part is optional. You might not want to state that we believe that our valuation will be this unless you're really clear about it. But the other things can be really, really clear. Common mistakes that happen are, as I mentioned, plenty. And this is natural. Funding is a complex issue. I don't think there has been a funding round ever in existence without making a few mistakes. So to me, your first funding round will be a learning experience. And I believe it's way better to see it also as a learning experience. It will most probably help you and ease you with the stress involved. It will help you acknowledge and be self-aware that it's okay that I don't know everything related to this, and I maybe not even know all the terms. But angel investors let's say usually are people who actually want to help, and that is why they are investing, because they want to share. They want to use that money for something that they care about. So they want to help. So it's okay to do mistakes. And the valuable part about it is that you want to learn about them. That is what will ultimately make you get to the end of your first funding round and close it. But with that caveat, let's talk about a few of the classic mistakes. getting money too early is definitely something many startups do. And the problem with that is that you haven't validated most of the assumptions that you have in your business plan, which makes it risky, the business plan, because there's many assumptions that you don't actually know if they are true. You still raise money. You might get that money because you're a great storyteller and you maybe have a network of investors already, so they trust you and they invest. You start running the business like you were planning to do. And the problem happens and comes when you start using that money, but using that money is not providing the results that you were looking for. And at that point, you will start panicking a little bit. Holy crap, we're not getting the results we were supposed to. And you start pivoting and looking for ways that, okay, where does this not work? And if that happens, take a few drinks of Sprite or Fanta, sit down for a while and remember this, that okay, maybe I raised the money too early, I wasn't ready for it, and that's fine, because that happens to most of the startups. And that's actually the story behind all this grows into the story why 90% of startups fail. And what you need to do is then start to understanding, okay, what are the things that involve the biggest amount of risk in my plan? What is the part I haven't been able to prove yet that for sure works? And you start understanding what are the riskiest assumptions in your business, and you start quickly using your resources to validate those risks, to understand that, is my assumption correct or not? I could talk about an hour about that topic too, but we'll go to the next point. Why most startups get the money too early is because they hide their weaknesses and they overpromise. And that is natural for us as human beings, especially optimistic entrepreneurs, which most of entrepreneurs are. So be realistic about your own weaknesses in the business, in the team. And it is actually way worse to overpromise and hide those weaknesses than be completely open about them. Being completely open about them helps you also, and your mind and your self-awareness, to understand truly, is this a time yet for me to actually look for funding? If it is, great. But if you still feel that, okay, this should be validated before we actually look for serious money, because if I don't learn this now and make sure that my assumption is correct, it's going to cost me much more when I start investing in this and then find out that, oh crap, this didn't work. It's going to cost you way a lot more money and resources at that point compared to this current moment when you don't have a burn rate, when you have a nimble team, where you can change things fast without explaining yourself to anybody. This is the time to learn. And preferably not. It is not the time preferably to learn when you have 100,000 euros already in your bank account and then you start playing around. It's way easier now. So there is a problem also when you ask too little money. And this is actually related to this getting money too early and hiding weaknesses part. Because if you ask too little money, you run the risk of not being able to prove that the business model works well enough. So you don't have the runway to do it. And we actually go automatically to the next point, that your runway is too short. That is a mistake that many startups do. There will be assumptions in your business plan for sure, and you will need the money and the time to build this successful and working and possibly scalable business model. So if you get money that will give you a runway of 4 months, I can tell you directly that 99% of cases, that time, that 4 months is not enough. And the reason is simple. Let's say that you could raise and close the next funding round in 2 months, which is miraculous. That gives you 2 months of time out of that 4 months to actually prove that this is actually a scalable and working business, so that you can use that rest 2 months to fundraise the next funding round. So 6 to 8 months is considered runway enough, usually. I would say that 6 months is short. 8 months is okay, and 10 months gives usually startups a runway big enough that they can actually prove and create the metrics and successes necessary that they can fundraise in time the next funding round, so that their growth will be sustainable. Okay. It is not very common that people ask too much money, but it is actually a mistake that you will learn quickly if you're doing it, because investors will be like, okay, oh, you're looking for $500,000 already. It sounds a lot. I'm not comfortable in discussing even this, that. I think it's more 100,000 that you might be looking for, or something similar. So you will learn that a lot if you are fast, if you're asking for too much. If you're only looking for investors who bring money only, it's a usual mistake. Usually what you want is so-called smart money. So you want investors who have networks they can share with you, or they have industry expertise that they can share with you, or they have some other skill or network or knowledge that will be valuable for your startup. You want those kind of investors, and you want to make sure that they are willing to share and actually utilize their networks and skills for you and together with you. We talked about investors dictating the valuation. That's not a good thing. So you want to be the one talking about the ask before they do. A classic mistake is that you start fundraising when you already desperately need the money. That's a bad thing, because you will most probably have to accept terms and valuations that you wouldn't otherwise do. And you would do that only because I need the money now. And if you can, fundraise when you don't desperately need the money. It's way, way better that way. And usually startup teams, especially when they raise their first funding round, they think that the money will somehow solve problems. And that's not the case. It will actually bring you, so to say, more problems. It will bring you more challenges. It won't really solve much. So it is actually a beginning of a huge adventure rather than some miraculous solution to the current situation. So yeah, I wouldn't look for solutions or miraculous things when I look for money, but I would want to actually look for things that will help me create value to the end users. Okay, there's a question. Is there a percentage that you should add additionally to your ask? Meaning to be sure that you will not run out of money and have space to play. Annette, a good question. In a way, yes. This is something that you should consider with your team, that what is your buffer in these, first of all, negotiations, and then the buffer within how much money you want to raise. It is completely about your business model. How much risk does it include at the moment? And how much do you think that currently a certain amount of money will actually help you validate those things or not? So it is a very complex question. If I would give you a very simplistic and not completely true answer, I would tell you that yes, a buffer is a good idea. And the argument the counter argument to that is that if you're looking for a buffer, most probably you will end up selling more of your shares to compensate for the extra money that you want. So I feel like there is a balance, and that balance needs to also take into account your larger funding strategy. So if you expect that you will be looking for 2 funding rounds, and you believe that those 2 funding rounds will propel your company to be a scalable working business, then I would definitely consider that if your team is more security and certainty driven, and you feel like it is more important to have a little bit of extra security, then I would consider that the buffer definitely is something to think about, especially if you expect only to have 2 funding rounds, which means that you won't be losing control of your company even if you give a little bit more equity to the investors in both rounds. So it is about the team definitely and what you want. There's a definitely, Caroline asking that or saying that she has to leave. I thought there was a second question. Okay, Caroline, thank you for being with us. All right, so we'll take a look at funding options quickly. And here I gave you a few links, which is more of a collection of things rather than single funding sources. But my number one funding option, even if this is about funding, my number one funding option is bootstrapping, which means that you don't look for funding, but you use your current resources that you have to validate all the assumptions that you have about your business model and plan. So you want to validate and mitigate all the risks at this current moment and in the coming 2 to 6 months, because that's most probably the cheapest and fastest and easiest way for you to do it. You're not burning much money. You're not risking that if you run out of that money without finding a working business model, it doesn't matter at this point because you haven't raised yet anything. So you're giving yourself time and ability to actually learn as fast as possible because you don't have any time frames, but you're free to experiment, to test, and to learn. So maximizing learning all the time until you feel and can prove to yourself through metrics that now this business model works. If I get 50,000 euros of angel investment, I can, through my own metrics, see that when I invest in this customer acquisition channel, I will get this much revenue back. And that is when your risk is low enough, from my perspective, that it actually makes sense to get outside money. Before that, yes, of course you can fundraise and maybe even get money. And the question is then that you just take a little bit bigger risk and you state to yourself that with 50,000 euros, I trust myself and the team that we will find all the missing pieces in the business model and make it work. Fine. And then you're aware of the risk you're taking and you can go ahead. So bootstrapping with very little money, learning as much as possible is my way to go personally. Local ELY centers, they offer mentoring, they offer certain types of funding. Business Finland has definitely many options. I've given you links to a few. The R&D part is actually a collection of different R&D funding sources that they offer. And I mentioned that about Tempo funding, I would mention later. So it is one of the basic tools that many startup companies will choose. You will need 30,000 euros of equity investments or so business angel investments in your account so that you can get a 50,000 grant from Business Finland. That grant is free money for you, but it includes a certain level of reporting and project management, which takes part of the money and effort. So there are some requirements for it, but definitely a very popular option. We talked a lot about local business angels, possible venture capitalists, they're definitely an option, of course. But in accordance or on top of those, there's a lot of different pilot projects, test bed type of options out there that offer funding. For example, in Finland, in Helsinki, Forum Virium is one of these city run companies that offer these kind of test beds where startups have different kind of possibilities to get some funding for some services that they provide. Paying customers is the preferable method, of course. If you can get paying customers from the beginning, that's where you should go. And just as a word of warning about external funding, be it from public or private sources, with Business Finland maybe especially, sometimes even business angels, those parties sometimes start trying to dictate to the startup team that from my perspective, you should do this, or from Business Finland perspective, you need to use the money for this type of activities because the funding guidelines tell you that that's the only direction you can use the money to. These are dangerous because at this point, if you start pleasing Business Finland and if you start pleasing your business angels, then your focus and your customers will actually end up being these people who give you money. And that's not how you grow a company. You grow a company because you create value to your end users and they pay for that value as money to you. So I just want to remind you that even if you get money from somewhere else than your customers, the customers are still the only key to success. This is 99.9% of the cases. Sometimes there is a startup who just raises money to create a solution in the market, and their business model is that they will get acquired by a competitor. It's a valid business model, but for that acquisition to happen, you actually need usually to have customers in any case to prove that this actually creates the value that you say that it does. But okay, outside of these so-called local sources, ELYs and so on, we can talk about the friends, fools, and family, so your own network of the first funding, these pilots, test beds, and projects. 6 Aika or 6 Aika is one of these type of projects that offer these test beds, and then Fiban we already mentioned. Go and check them out if you haven't had the time yet to do it. And if you get a no as an answer from any of these sources, always ask why. But why are you not interested in this case? Because these are your best opportunities to actually learn more. And you want to learn as fast as possible, especially if you haven't fundraised before, because time is of essence. And if you learn fast, you have a good chance of actually closing your funding round. But if you learn super slow, yeah, you'll just keep on doing the same mistakes with the same results, which usually means that you're not going to be able to raise the money you want. In the others, there's a collection of different funding sources. There's surprisingly many under these links, especially in the funding sources by Helsinki Chamber of Commerce. It's in Finnish, but I personally tried using Google Translate to translate it in English, and it provides all the necessary links to find 90% or so of the funding sources that we have in Finland, and it actually remained clear and understandable even after Google translation. EU funding is to the EEN site, the link, you can go check that out. It's mostly about Horizon funding out of EU. And then as an example from the cultural side of startups, I actually have 2 links there. There's a boatload of different kind of organizations who give out funding for different types of users. And you want to take a look at what are your own, in this case, health side funding options. Terkko also gives a lot of help here to understand that what are the vertical specific funding sources that are available. All right. Any questions and any comments you want to make? We have a few minutes here for some discussion and Q&A.
Can I ask your opinion about crowdfunding?
About?
Crowdfunding, like
crowdfunding. Yes.
Yeah.
I actually deliberately left it out from this presentation because I don't consider it to be funding. The name is misleading from my perspective, because crowdfunding doesn't actually leave you, in most of the cases, it doesn't actually leave you with funding to use. What crowdfunding actually is that you are validating that are there enough people with a big enough need that they trust a new player in the market with a novel service or product, and that they're willing to try this new service to get a solution to their problem. That is what you're actually trying. So you want to understand how big the market is. That is why you do a crowdfunding campaign, and you see that, can I find in the space of 3 months that the crowdfunding campaign goes on, can I find people who are willing to pay 100 euros for this, and I would get 500,000 of sales or 100,000 of sales in this 3-month period. It won't give you, it's not like a funding round, because most of your money will be used in the production of that service or product, and thus it's not really like funding. It is actually more of a sales effort. And there's very good short feedback. Okay, pitching video, how to improve? Yeah, I can take a look at the pitching video after this and send you a couple of comments. I'll copy paste this, so I'll see that. Okay. All right. Any other questions?
Hello.
Hello, Andre.
If let's say the service I have in my mind about to pitched and sold to investors has some, let's say, hardware component or development costs, how in real life it might affect the need for the investment? Because I've read previously, was it that I read that hardware component typically requests some kind of additional investments,
yeah,
but also the runway in the money sense, because the developing the presence of the hardware creates a more delay and uncertainty and stuff.
Yes, Andre, thank you for the question. It's an excellent question, and the answer is yes. So why does hardware need more money? Is I'll try to keep it simple. If you build software and you ship your software, it is super easy to fix any bugs in the software. You compare that to hardware, you build a hardware product, you ship it. If there is a hardware related problem, you're effed, because you have to call back all those products if you want to fix them or create a new batch. So it is seen that in hardware, the risk involved in the project is way, way higher. And thus, to mitigate all those risks in the hardware project needs time, money, and more development, more, what's the word, quality control. So that's why usually hardware startups are seen as a bit more risky. And that's also why the startup team in the hardware startup is seen as a way more important part of it. And if you have a team of first-time startuppers with not a lot of experience, that's seen as a big risk. So that is why when investors see a hardware case, they pay much more attention to the credibility of the team and do they believe that the team can actually create a quality product already on their first try? I hope
I have a second question, because effectively in my past I had done some, let's say, software on top of hardware. I worked for the Amigo team with Nokia, so I am familiar with actual challenges. But my second, let's say, sub question is that, can I, for the period of testing the business idea, meaning how it works as a business, not as a hardware, can I hypothetically substitute it with some more kind of off-the-shelf components and try to test? It's kind of fake it till you make it, but how investors take it typically in this case?
A good investor understands your adaptability and your logic behind all this and will appreciate it. A not so good investor will see your team as amateurs and maybe not understand what you're doing, and you shouldn't give a rat's ass about those kind of investors from my point of view. You want those investors who understand the value of experimenting and keeping the make it till you actually make it they will value that attitude. So I wouldn't worry at all. Just keep on keeping the costs low and learning as fast as possible, validating also the end user need with as little budget as possible. That's my advice for that.
And quickly, I'm sorry.
Well, we're out of time. Let's wrap it up here.
Okay.
Yeah. I think you can. Did your slides have the contacts, Oki?
I can add them and then send them to you, Rashad.
That would be very nice. And then I will. Then those who have the questions, they can directly ask you. Ha! Here I am again, glowing. Right. But thank you very much. I hope I didn't interrupt anyone too badly. But yeah, thank you very much, Oki. And I see the chat. People are very happy with your answers and the presentation. You've done a good job.
Thank you.
In a confirmed way. I knew you would. That's why I invited you to this event. But yeah, I'm happy that our audience is happy too. So we have a recording, and I will end the recording and share it with the audience together with your slides. Okay. And let's see.